Welcome to the Friday Night Campfire Stories. My name is Rob, and I will be your host for this evening. If you're new here, this is my series that I share with you every Friday where I share a chapter from one of my original stories with you guys. Last week we started my story Perspective. If you didn't watch chapter 1 on my channel, definitely go back to do that before watching chapter 2. But if you've already watched chapter 1 and you are caught up, and I know that you'll be ready to hear what happens next in chapter 2 of my story Perspective. So let's waste no more time. Welcome to chapter 2 of Perspective.
Perspective Chapter 2. 6 months had passed since that unforgettable night when everything in Brad's life finally felt complete. Now as he looked at Sophia, radiant in a simple white dress, standing barefoot on the back patio, he couldn't believe how lucky he was. She smiled at him, her eyes sparkling with a warmth that made his heart swell, her hand resting gently on the small round curve of her belly. It was a perfect day, the sun casting a golden glow over the garden that he'd tended himself, hoping to make this moment even more beautiful. Only the priest stood nearby, quietly preparing for the ceremony, but it didn't matter. All Brad could see was Sophia, his bride, his partner, the mother of his child. It was just the two of them, exactly as they'd planned, and he wouldn't have it any other way. "I can't believe this day is here," he murmured, taking her hands in his. "You're everything I've ever wanted, Sophia. I don't need anyone else but you." She squeezed his hands, smiling up at him with that shy, loving look he'd come to adore. "Neither do I. It's just us, Brad. That's all I've ever needed." The priest began, reciting the vows in a soft voice, but Brad barely heard a word. All he could focus on was Sophia, how her face glowed with joy, how she laughed softly when he stumbled over his words, his hand brushing her cheek. She looked perfect, and every moment felt like a dream come to life. When the priest asked him to repeat his vows, Brad's voice came out low and earnest, filled with everything he felt for her. "Sophia, from the moment I saw you again, I knew I'd never let you go. You're my heart, my family, my everything. I promise to protect you, to love you, and to cherish every moment with you, you and our little one." His voice caught, but he quickly steadied it, feeling his heart race. "You're my world." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered her own vows, her hand drifting down to the curve of her belly. "Brad, I feel safe with you, and that's all I've ever wanted. I've never felt so loved. I promise to be here, by your side, forever. For you, for our baby, for us." With a final blessing from the priest, they exchanged rings, simple silver bands they'd chosen together. When he kissed her, the world seemed to fall away. It was just him and Sophia, their lives entwined, their future together sealed in that moment. As they stood together, Brad's heart raced with excitement. He'd waited his entire life for this, and now, with Sophia as his wife, he knew that their future was bright and full of love. As the weeks went by after their small, intimate wedding, Brad and Sophia settled into a cozy, joyful routine. Their little family felt complete even before their baby girl arrived, and every day was filled with laughter, love, and Brad's unwavering devotion to keeping Sophia happy. One morning, as they lounged on the couch together, Sophia brought up a question she'd hinted at a few times since they moved in. "I was thinking, maybe I should look into getting a job again, just something part-time." Brad's eyes softened, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Sophia, you know I've got it all covered," he assured her. "You don't have to worry about working. I want you to relax and enjoy this time, especially now, with the baby on the way." She looked down a little hesitant. "I know, but I don't want to feel like I'm relying on you too much." He tilted her chin up so their eyes met. "You're not relying on me too much. I'm doing this because I want to. I'm more than happy to support us, Sophia, My job pays well enough, and I want you to be able to stay home with our daughter when she's here." Sophia smiled softly, placing a hand on her belly. "You're really amazing, you know that?" she murmured, resting her head on his shoulder. "I don't think I ever imagined things would turn out this perfectly." In the months that followed, Brad made sure to be there for every appointment, every moment. He'd sit by her side during ultrasounds, holding her hand as they watched their daughter's tiny form flicker on the screen. They'd pick out baby names together, laughing and disagreeing over lists of possibilities, only to finally agree on one that made them both smile. One night, as they were lying in bed, Brad brushed a hand over Sophia's belly, feeling the baby kick beneath his fingers. "She's going to be so loved, Sophia," he whispered. "I want to give her the world, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she never has to go without." Sophia looked up at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I'm lucky to have you, Brad. You work so hard for us. I don't know how you do it." Brad chuckled softly, running a hand through his hair. "Six figures makes a lot of things possible," he said with a grin. "It's nothing fancy, just finance stuff, you know. But it keeps things steady, and it lets me make sure you don't have to worry about anything." Over the next few weeks, Brad busied himself preparing the nursery. He insisted on doing everything himself, painting the walls a soft pastel, assembling the crib, carefully choosing each detail. He wanted it to be perfect for Sophia and their daughter. And as Sophia's belly grew, so did his excitement. They spent their nights talking about the future, laughing about all the dreams they had for their little girl. One evening, as they were finishing dinner, Sophia reached over and took Brad's hand. "I was thinking today about how quickly everything changed for us," she began, her gaze warm and tender. "It feels like just yesterday we were getting dinner, reconnecting, and now look at us, married, with a baby on the way." Brad squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with affection. "I never would have believed it either," he replied, smiling. "I thought I'd lost my chance with you back in high school. But the moment I saw you again, I knew it was meant to be. You're everything I've ever wanted, Sophia." They finished their meal, talking about the nursery, the baby shower he had planned, and all the little things they do as a family. Sophia would lean back, laughing as Brad described all the grand plans he had in mind for their daughter's first birthday, her first words, her first steps. Every dream he had, every thought centered around their future together. As the weeks turned into months, the reality of their new life settled in. Brad would head out to work early in the morning, kissing Sophia goodbye as she sipped her tea and began the day at home, taking care of things, decorating, preparing for the baby. And each night he'd come home to her, eager to hear all about her day, the little details that made his world feel complete. It was the life he'd always wanted, and he promised himself he'd do everything to protect it. The day their daughter was born felt like a dream to Brad. From the moment Sophia told him the contractions had started, he was by her side, calm and ready, just as he had promised her. They'd planned a home birth, wanting it to be an intimate, peaceful experience, surrounded by the comforts of the place they shared. "Sophia, you're incredible," he whispered, holding her hand as they prepared together, their midwife arriving to assist. "I'm here with you. Just breathe." She smiled up at him, her face glowing even through the labor. "With you here, I feel like I can do anything," she murmured, squeezing his hand. The gentle encouragement he gave her, in the way he stayed close, never letting go, eased her nerves. Each contraction came and went, and he marveled at her strength and grace, feeling his heart swell with love and admiration. As labor progressed, Brad was amazed by how beautifully she handled it. He kept telling her how proud he was, how strong she was, and when she would look at him, he could see the trust and gratitude in her eyes. "We're almost there, Sophia," he said softly, brushing her hair back from her face. "Just a little longer, and our girl will be here." A few more breaths, a little more pushing, and suddenly there she was, their daughter. The moment Brad saw her, tiny and perfect, tears filled his eyes. He held Sophia's hand tightly as they heard the first soft cries of their newborn, a sound that would stay etched in his heart forever. "Oh my God, Brad." Sophia's voice was a soft whisper of wonder, her face filled with joy and relief. "She's beautiful." With the midwife's guidance, Brad gently placed their daughter on Sophia's chest, watching as the baby instinctively curled close to her mother's warmth. "She's perfect," he said, his voice catching, "just like her mom." They held each other there, lost in awe as they took in every tiny feature. The soft hair on her head, her delicate hands, her little nose that looked just like Sophia's. For a moment, everything else faded away. It was just the three of them, together, exactly as he had always dreamed. As they sat there in the dimly lit room, Brad wrapped his arms around his wife and daughter, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Sophia," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "thank you for giving me everything I've ever wanted. You've made me the happiest man alive." Sophia looked up at him, her eyes filled with love. "You're everything I've ever wanted too, Brad," she replied softly. "Our family, our little girl. I wouldn't trade this for the world." They sat there together, cradling their new daughter, feeling as though time itself had paused just for them. In Brad's eyes, this was a perfect beginning, a moment of pure, quiet happiness, where he felt certain they'd be happy forever. As Brad sat beside Sophia, holding their newborn daughter together for the first time, he couldn't stop smiling. The baby's tiny fingers curled around his thumb, and he was completely captivated, his heart swelling with a love he'd never felt before. "She's perfect," he murmured, watching as the baby blinked her big, curious eyes up at them. Sophia smiled, brushing her finger gently over their daughter's soft cheek. "She really is our little miracle." Brad looked down at Sophia, warmth filling his gaze. "Have you thought of a name?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. They'd talked about names for months, but now, seeing her here in their arms, it felt so much more real. Sophia's eyes glistened with happy tears as she glanced at him. "I kept coming back to one name. It just feels right now that she's here." Brad's heart raced with anticipation, and he nodded, urging her on. "Tell me," he whispered. Sophia looked back at their daughter, her voice full of love as she said, "Aurora." Brad repeated it, feeling the name resonate. "Evelyn," he said softly. "It's beautiful." He looked down at their little girl, cradled so delicately in Sophia's arms. "Aurora, our Aurora Rose." Sophia's face brightened and she nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Aurora Rose," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "It's perfect." Together they whispered their daughter's name, their hearts entwined as they gazed down at her, a beautiful beginning for their little Aurora Rose. In that quiet moment, as Brad held his family close, he knew he'd do everything he could to protect this happiness for the rest of his life.
Perspective. Chapter 2. Sophia's version. Sophia's eyes fluttered open to darkness, the kind that pressed in on her from all sides, swallowing every trace of light. For a moment, she couldn't tell if it was day or night. The days had blurred together in the cramped, musty room, and the concept of time had long since slipped through her fingers. She moved to stretch, but the heavy chain around her wrist held her in place, biting into her skin with a cold, unyielding pressure. The cuff was tight enough to leave bruises, a reminder of how carefully he kept her restrained. She shifted her weight, feeling the familiar ache in her back and shoulders from nights spent on the thin, filthy mattress in the corner, which reeked of mildew and the stale air that never seemed to circulate. Sophia rested a hand over her stomach, feeling the swell of her unborn child beneath her fingertips. 6 months. 6 months since he'd taken her. And now, 6 months pregnant. She'd always imagined pregnancy would be a joyful time in her life, something to share with the people she loved. But here, the thought of bringing a child into this nightmare twisted her heart with fear and dread. She took a shaky breath, trying to ignore the stench of decay that clung to the basement walls. Every surface was covered in a film of grime. The single bucket he allowed her to use as a toilet sat in the corner, untouched since the last time he'd come down to empty it. She'd pleaded with him for better living conditions, but her words fell on deaf ears. He simply smiled, his voice sickly sweet, insisting that he was taking care of her. Taking care of me, she thought bitterly. Her stomach churned as she remembered his words, the way he spoke of their life together with such conviction, as if this basement prison could ever resemble anything close to happiness. Somewhere above her, she heard faint footsteps creak across the floorboards. She held her breath, her heart racing. It could mean anything, another one of his visits, or, if she were lucky, food and water. She'd learned not to get her hopes up. Brad had a way of keeping her in suspense, coming down only when he pleased, often with long stretches of silence in between. Sophia glanced at the worn marks on the concrete wall beside her, faint scratches she'd made to count the days since her imprisonment. Her tally had grown almost meaningless as the days stretched on, each one bleeding into the next, an endless cycle of darkness and captivity. Yet the passing months had brought one undeniable truth. Her body had changed, her belly growing with the life she carried, a life she'd never wanted to share with Brad. Her mind wandered back to those first few weeks after he'd drugged her and dragged her here, her screams echoing off the cold walls of the basement, unanswered. She'd begged, fought, tried everything to escape, but the more she resisted, the more vicious his grip became. Each visit was a twisted reminder of his control, his delusional belief that this was love. Sophia's hand drifted to her swollen stomach again, her heart heavy with dread. She whispered to the child growing inside her, promising them things she had no power to give. Freedom, safety, a life outside of these walls. But in the deepest part of her mind, she feared that Brad would never let either of them go. With a heavy sigh, she leaned back against the wall, waiting. Sophia's heart pounded as she heard Brad's hurried footsteps descending the stairs, each one heavier and faster than usual. The basement door burst open, slamming against the wall, and he appeared, eyes narrowed, his face twisted in an expression she'd come to recognize as both anger and control. "Not a sound, Sophia," he hissed, his hand resting on something tucked into his waistband. The outline of a weapon flashed in her vision, and fear shot through her. "Do you understand?" She nodded, her voice frozen in her throat. She didn't dare breathe too loudly, holding herself as still as possible as Brad watched her, his gaze warning her of consequences if she disobeyed. Then, from upstairs came a sound she hadn't heard in months, a knock on the front door. Her pulse quickened, hope flickering to life in her chest. Brad scowled, glancing back toward the stairs, then fixing her with a dangerous glare. "Remember what I said," he muttered before hurrying back up, closing the basement door behind him. As soon as he was gone, Sophia strained her ears, listening intently. She could barely make out the muffled sounds of voices from above, but one of them was unfamiliar. A man's voice, calm but firm and official. "Mr. Dawson, I'm Detective Miller with the city police. I'm here because we're following up on a report of a missing woman, Sophia Green. She was last seen several months ago, and I understand you may have had contact with her?" Brad's response came smooth and calm, sounding disturbingly normal. "Detective, yes. Sophia and I went out a few times after reconnecting. We knew each other from high school. We had dinner together and, well, she was here, yes. But things didn't work out. She mentioned wanting to travel for a while to find herself, and that was the last I heard from her." There was a pause before the officer spoke again, his tone skeptical. "Several witnesses reported seeing the two of you on a date at a restaurant near her apartment. After that night, no one has heard from her. Her family is very concerned. You understand we're just following every lead, and I have to ask, are you absolutely sure you haven't heard from her since?" Brad's response was smooth, confident. "Of course. I even called her a couple of times to check in, but when she didn't respond, I figured she'd gone off like she said she would. I really hope she's all right." Sophia's fingers clenched tightly around the cold metal of the chain binding her wrist. She felt trapped, furious, and desperate as Brad continued weaving his web of lies. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Dawson," the detective replied. "In cases like this, we sometimes ask to search the residence just to be thorough. Would you be willing to allow that?" Sophia's pulse thundered as silence hung in the air, her whole body rigid with hope and terror. If they came down here, if they looked hard enough? Finally, she heard Brad's voice, perfectly steady. "Of course, Detective, I have nothing to hide. Feel free to look around." Sophia held her breath as footsteps began moving through the house. The hope swelled in her chest, tinged with fear as she waited, straining her ears for the moment they might open the door and find her. The footsteps grew closer, and she could hear a set descending the stairs. Her heart pounded as she tried to gauge the distance between the cop and the soundproofed wall. She prayed he would sense something was wrong, that he'd check every inch, that he'd somehow find her. She took a deep, desperate breath, willing herself to be brave, and let out a scream with everything she had. "Help! I'm here! Help me!" The sound echoed in the small space, but outside the room, nothing changed. She screamed again, her voice hoarse with desperation, but the thick layers of insulation Brad had used drowned her cries. She sank back, defeated, the faint voices of Brad and the detective fading as they climbed back up the stairs. Moments later, she heard them reach the door. "Well, thank you for cooperating, Mr. Dawson," the detective said, sounding almost convinced. "We're trying to cover all our bases, but we appreciate your patience." "Of course, Detective. I hope she's all right. Let me know if I can do anything else to help." Brad's voice was full of concern, sickeningly perfect, calm, and steady. The door closed, and a heavy silence settled in, crushing Sophia's faint glimmer of hope. A moment later, she heard the familiar creak of the basement door as Brad began his descent. The basement door creaked open, and Sophia's stomach twisted as Brad descended the stairs, his expression unusually calm, almost cheerful. She held her breath, bracing for whatever cruel act he'd devised this time. But instead, he smiled at her, a sickly, twisted smile that made her skin crawl. "Today," he began, holding up a small velvet box and opening it with a dramatic flourish, "is a very special day for us, Sophia." Sophia's eyes widened in confusion and horror as she took in the box's contents, 2 silver rings glinting in the dim basement light. Her mind reeled, unable to process the bizarre shift in his demeanor, the gentle affection in his eyes that seemed utterly detached from reality. One afternoon, Sophia's tense silence was interrupted by the sound of Brad's heavy footsteps clanging down the stairs again. She braced herself, wondering what new horror he might bring. But this time he was carrying something awkwardly bulky, a crib, disassembled and painted a soft blue, the pieces rattling in his hands. "I bought this for the baby," he announced with a hint of pride in his voice. He set it down in front of her, gesturing to the pieces as if expecting her to marvel at them. "I thought we could work together on it, you know, as a family." Sophia's stomach twisted with fury and revulsion. Her restraint snapped, and she shot him a glare filled with all the hatred she could muster. "Family!" she spat, her voice laced with venom. "You think a crib and some empty, twisted fantasy make us a family?" Brad's face fell slightly, but she was relentless, words spilling out, unchecked. "You have kept me here like some prisoner, chained to a wall, with no choice, no control. You think this—" she gestured toward the crib, voice trembling with rage. "Will make me forgive you? Are you that sick?" He flinched but quickly tried to recover, reaching a hand toward her, his expression softening as if to calm her. "Sophia, please, try to understand. I've done everything for us, for our child. We'll be so happy together once you let yourself accept it. This is a gift, my love." She let out a harsh, bitter laugh, every bit of anger flooding out. "A gift? You wouldn't know what love is if it hit you in the face, you delusional monster. I hate you, Brad. I hate everything about you." The words seemed to settle heavily in the damp air, and she held her gaze steady, unafraid of the flicker of anger that crossed his face. His expression turned cold and hard, and he stared at her in a way that made her skin prickle with unease. After a tense silence, he simply picked up the crib pieces and began assembling it himself, ignoring her like she was a mere inconvenience. But she could see the slight tremor in his hands, the way his jaw tightened as he worked. She had struck a nerve, and though it might mean punishment later, she didn't care. For once, she felt some small satisfaction in making him uncomfortable. As the crib took shape, a twisted sense of dread filled her. She knew that with each passing day, her time was running out. The reality of giving birth in this basement, of bringing a child into this horrific nightmare, loomed ever closer, filling her with a desperation she couldn't ignore. She glanced at the door, hoping one day she'd find a way out, not just for her, but for her unborn child. But as Brad stepped back from his work with a satisfied smile, wiping his hands and admiring the completed crib, the chill in her bones reminded her that the nightmare was far from over. Sophia's stomach twisted with a pain so sharp and sudden it made her cry out, clutching at the chain that bound her wrist to the wall. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, the damp air of the basement filling her lungs as sweat poured down her face. "Brad!" she screamed, her voice trembling with panic. The pain came again, stabbing through her abdomen and radiating into her back. She bit her lip to stifle another scream, trying to think through the haze of fear. Brad came bounding down the stairs moments later, his expression one of mild concern. "What is it?" he asked, his tone almost annoyed. Sophia doubled over, clutching her belly. "Something's wrong. It's the baby," she gasped, her voice trembling. "I need to go to the hospital, Brad, please. I think something's really wrong." Brad frowned, shaking his head. "Sophia, you're overreacting. It's probably just some cramps or something. You'll be fine." "Cramps!" she shrieked, her voice breaking with frustration and fear. "I'm in labor. Please, Brad, I need help." But he dismissed her panic with a wave of his hand. "You don't need a hospital. You just need to relax. I'll grab you some Tylenol, okay? That'll help." Without waiting for her response, he turned and walked back up the stairs, locking the door behind him as if she were just another chore to deal with later. Sophia stared after him in disbelief, tears streaming down her face as another wave of pain ripped through her body. She screamed, gripping the chain so tightly it cut into her palms. The agony was relentless, a deep primal pain that racked her entire body, leaving her trembling and soaked in sweat. The contractions came faster and harder, each one a tidal wave of excruciating pressure that left her gasping for air. She writhed on the filthy mattress, her hands clawing at the damp fabric as she tried to find any position that might ease the pain. But there was no escape. She was trapped in this basement, trapped in her body, and trapped in this nightmare. The hours dragged on, each moment feeling like an eternity. Her screams echoed off the walls, a haunting symphony of pain and despair that no one would hear. She gritted her teeth until her jaw ached, biting back sobs as the pain grew unbearable. When the time came to push, her body took over, instinct driving her forward even as her mind screamed for it to stop. She bore down with all her strength, her vision blurring as she fought against the overwhelming agony. The sensation was raw and primal, as if her body were being torn apart. Sophia screamed until her throat was raw, her cries turning into hoarse gasps as she gave one final, desperate push. And then, as if the world held its breath, there was a sharp release, a small, fragile cry piercing through the silence. Her chest heaved as she stared down at the tiny, squirming baby in her trembling hands. Tears streamed down her face, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and heartbreak. Her daughter. her beautiful, innocent daughter. But the joy she should have felt was marred by the reality of her situation. This moment, this life-altering moment, was stolen from her by the chains that bound her to this hell. Before she could fully process what had just happened, the door creaked open, and Brad's voice rang out. "Sophia, I'm back. Got the Tylen?" His voice faltered as he reached the bottom of the stairs, his eyes widening at the sight before him. "Oh my God," he whispered, dropping the bag of painkillers and rushing to her side. His face lit up with a joy that made her stomach churn. "She's here. Our baby girl." Sophia flinched as Brad scooped up the baby, cradling her in his arms with a look of pure adoration. Tears streamed down his face as he held their daughter close, his voice thick with emotion. "She's perfect, Sophia, absolutely perfect." He looked at her, smiling through his tears. "What should we name her?" Sophia's body ached, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. She clenched her jaw, glaring at him with defiance. "Aurora!" she spat, her voice sharp and cold. "Aurora Rose!" Brad blinked, surprised by her sudden declaration, but his face softened. "Aurora Rose," he repeated, nodding. "It's beautiful." He held the baby closer, his tears falling onto her tiny face. "Aurora Rose," he said again, his voice full of reverence. "Welcome to our family." Sophia watched him through narrowed eyes, her heart breaking. This was supposed to be the happiest moment of her life, but instead it was a cruel parody of what could have been. And as Brad rocked Aurora in his arms, cooing softly, Sophia vowed to herself that no matter what, she would find a way to get her daughter out of this nightmare.
That is going to do it for this week's chapter of Perspective. I hope that you guys did enjoy. If you did, be sure to click that like button, hit that subscribe button. I make 3 full-length videos every week, each a different series. Every Monday I do an episode of Echoes of the Past, which is my haunted history series. Every Wednesday I do an episode of Far From Fiction, which is my true crime series. And every Friday, what you're watching here, the Friday Night Campfire stories. Also, I'm proud to announce that my new book, The Hollow Season, I have one of the first physical copies of the book right here, is available for pre-order on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. The link is in the description. But also, you can have a chance to win a signed copy of this book. All you have to do is be subscribed and like and comment any of the full-length videos between June 30th and July 25th, and you'll be entered in for a chance to win the signed copy of the book. That can also include this video. If you want to go through the other ones and like and comment on those as well, that gets you more entries. Every video that you interact with gets you another entry and a better chance of winning a signed copy of my book. But that is going to do it for today. I hope that you guys did enjoy. Please like the video, hit that subscribe button, and as always, thank you for spending a little bit of your evening here with me.